Gaelic Football on Off the Ball.
With AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.
Now you're welcome back. So let's talk some GAA. Very happy to say Colm Boyle and Darran O'Sullivan are joining us as the least punitive group stages in world sport are drawing to a close. So in Group 1, to give you the headline news, Mayo are officially qualified. Cork and Kerry are on 2 points. Louth on no points. Gave a decent account of themselves in Castlebar. So Kerry, if they want to top Group 1, they would need Cork to beat Mayo to take top spot. They play Louth, Kerry in the final round. Group 2, Galway already through. Armagh and Tyrone are on 2 points each. Westmeath still on 0 points. Group 3, kind of interesting. Roscommon and Dublin both on 3 points. Kildare and Sligo both on a point each. Now, Dublin play Sligo next. Roscommon play Kildare. There's a very good chance that Kildare and Sligo will both lose, meaning it will come down to points difference. Kildare are a point better off than Sligo as things stand, but it would mean one of the two, Kildare or Sligo, would progress without any wins in Group 3. And then Group 4, Derry and Monaghan on 3 points, Donegal on 2 points, and then Clare no points. Clare officially out. So Derry, Monaghan 3 points, and Donegal 2 points is where we are. Colm Boyle and Darran O'Sullivan, like I said, are with us. There was a degree, Colm, where I think most people's instinct at the outset of these group stages was that 3 from 4 was a little too generous, but let's see how it all plays out. I think in a bid to avoid dead rubbers at all costs, we have created a kind of limbo which is just not capturing the imagination.
No, 100%, Joe, and I think it's highlighted by the fact that Kildare or Sligo, there's a possibility they're going to get out of the group, as you mentioned there, with 2 defeats and a draw, which is ridiculous, really. So it's not capturing the imagination for a couple of reasons, really. I think people are still trying to figure this format out. I think the quality of the football and the fare that's been on offer has been so poor, even though, to be fair, there were some decent games at the weekend, but I think overall it's been really, really poor. People are putting the low crowds at the weekend down to the weather. Maybe that was a factor as well. Like I was in Castlebar on Sunday, Joe, at the Mayo Louth game, and like Mayo's home support is normally really, really good. And I think the Mayo-Galway game on the 29th of January, there was over 14,000 people at it. That's a league game on a Saturday night in January. Last Sunday, championship game, which is effectively a game to try and get you through to a quarter-final, there was 11,500 people there. So something's not quite right there. And I know people are saying the weather, other things for doing bank holiday weekend. And yes, you factor all that in. But I think when you go around the country and around the grounds, you know what I mean? A lot of empty seats, a lot of empty stadiums, and it leads to poor atmosphere, poor games, and we're getting an awful lot of that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Like, I think, Darren, the GA were burned by the Super 8s, and there are, John Fogarty, for instance, reminded me in 18 and in 19, Dublin won their first 2 games, and then they put out effectively second-string sides against Roscommon and Tyrone. So it's like they really got it into their minds, don't want dead rubbers. And so the headline news ahead of the final round is, 15 of 16 teams are still alive. And they are, in theory, but they're not really. I mean, Louth will have to beat Kerry at a neutral venue. I don't know if that's capturing the imagination realistically. Westmeath will have to go and beat Tyrone. Again, I don't think that's really capturing people. Kildare or Sligo potentially through with 1 point and 2 defeats doesn't feel right. And then in Group 4, Clare are out already, so we have kind of a dead rubber in a sense there. There's nothing to play for, whereas if it was only 2 through from Group 4, you'd effectively have a knockout game between Donegal and Monaghan this weekend. Instead, Clare are out. It's just a bit of jostling for position. So this kind of 15 of 16 still in it, everything is still to play for selling point. It feels like fairly hollow PR next to the reality.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. Look, I suppose with the new formula, it was always going to be a bit of trial and error. Probably a bit more error this year. But yeah, like you said, if there was only 2 to go through, it leaves an awful lot to play for. All of a sudden, Kerry's game against Cork the weekend, there's even more pressure on that. Whether they can change it for next year, I don't know. There's so many changes every year that comes in, it's hard to keep track of them. But a lot of it is just tweaks. All of a sudden, the Super 8 actually seems very appealing, and that got enough abuse. But yeah, like, it is a small tweak. If it was only 2 teams to go through, all of a sudden there's some great games. And look, you know, that's what it's all about. I suppose we wanted more games, but there's probably too many games, and like you said, too many games that were pretty much meaningless. So look, it is a bit of tweak, and we won't go too mad about it, because look, we've been crying out for change. They were never going to get it right initially, and that's what it's about. It's about a bit of trial and error. We want all these games. The players want the games, but next year it'll be about making it a bit more cutthroat, I suppose, and making more of the games meaningful.
Yeah, like, I've seen the argument Colm made, and I do get the logic that 3 from 4 going through, it will pretty much ensure that all, you know, the big teams, they won't get caught out in the hop. They'll make it through. We'll have a fairly stacked quarter final, which will really look great on paper, and that's a fair argument. I suppose there's a degree here of, geez, like, we really are eating all our vegetables first here. I just wouldn't mind a bit of salt on things. I don't mind 1 or 2 big names going out early if it gives a bit of juice to May or June, you know.
And Joe, look, we spoke about this last week. This is exactly what the championship needs. It almost needs a bit of life thrown into it by a big team going out of it. And it would be great if that was in 2 weeks' time, you know, because a lot of the football has been so passive, and I think it's been passive because teams are just, not saying they're not going for the course they are, but it's not do or die. It's not cutthroat, and that's why we're seeing so much pedestrian style football. I think, like Darran said, the counter argument that is, I suppose, Darran mentioned Cork and Kerry there, like, the way this system is, it's almost bulletproof for the top 6 or 7 teams to get to a quarter final, and it's so difficult for the likes of a Cork. Like, Cork bet Louth on the first day. They could have beaten Kerry and Páirc Uí Chaoimh last Saturday, which would have been a huge result, and it still might only get them into a playoff because if Mayo bet them in the last weekend. So there's something not right with that either. It's very hard for a team like Cork to make a breakthrough as well. So I think there's a balance to that, and it works both ways.
Let's pick our way through some of the games. You mentioned you were at Castlebar, Colm, for Mayo, 14 points, Louth 110. This game was on TV, so I suspect plenty of people have seen it. Louth scored a late goal and a point to sharpen up the scoreboard, and for a moment I think even in commentary the thought was they'd equalise, but there was a mistake on the scoreboard, so it turned out they got to within a point. So Louth gave very decent account of themselves. We're back, Colm, to the conversation we had after Mayo's defeat to Roscommon. They, of the top teams, have a problem of sorts. How great it is, I don't know. We can tease that out now, but they certainly don't love breaking down a blanket defence. No, Joe.
We'll probably as well get this one out of the way first. It was the Gaelic Football version of the Europa League final last week between Roma and Sevilla, and Mickey Hart was certainly Jose Mourinho in this case. It was dour stuff. Yeah. But look, Louth did what they had to do. They came to McHale Park with a game plan around containment, frustrating Mayo, staying in the game for as long as they could, and possibly coming at the end to maybe take the game or steal the game. And they almost did it, to their credit. You know, you mentioned Mayo not being able to break them down, and they weren't for long spells. But to be honest, on the 73rd minute, Joe, Mayo were 14-9 up. And I think if that game finishes 14-9 and they don't concede 1-1 in the last 90 seconds, or minute, I think people's perception of the game might be slightly different, and they might say, look, it was awful stuff to watch. Mayo did what they had to do. They won it comfortably for a finish. You know, they pulled away when it mattered. Job done, away you go. But then they concede that 1-1, and I think people are thinking a small bit different about Mayo now at the minute, which is fine. I don't think Kevin McStay would be overly worried about that. But they did, there's no doubt about it, find it hard to break Louth down, and you could visibly see there was frustration in the players' faces. There was actually frustration on the sideline as well. Kevin McStay, who's normally very cool, Jack Carney had a shot one time from a mark that I thought it looked wide, but McStay was adamant that it was over, and he was really going for it with the linesman. I think that was just a symbol of the frustration of the day. and not being able to break Louth down. The key thing for me, I think Mayo all week would have spoken about getting out of the blocks early, a fast start, get out in front of Louth, don't give them a chance to breathe, and they do that. They're 3-0 up after 5 minutes, but they only score 4 points then for the rest of the half. And Louth really gets set in their defensive structure. And Mayo never really were able to get their shooters on the ball, the Ryan O'Donoghu's, the James Carr, Aidan O'Shea's around the D, or myself and Darran were speaking beforehand, shooting over that press and getting scores from 45 metres out the way. You know, Mayo never really tried any of those efforts, and you know, they were never chipping away at the scoreboard. Everything was always really, really hard work, and the scores were hard to come by, and that's why it left it so tight at the end. And Louth had a massive goal chance, Joe, at the start of the second half, by Leonard Gray. If that goes in, because McHale Park was already getting edgy at this stage, if that goes in, it's a huge moment. It's a brilliant ball over the top by Liam Jackson to Leonard Gray. Colin Reap hesitates, then comes for it, and ends up making a big save, put it over the bar. If that had gone in, it would have been a really nervy second half for Mayo. In the end, it was a win. But look, if you're Kevin McStay, you would have taken 2 wins from 2, and on you go to the Cork game, chance to win it now to be guaranteed a quarter final.
Yeah, because in Monaghan Clare, actually, we saw lots of great long-range scoring, and I would have thought conditions would have allowed for it. But my defining memory, Darran, of the game is Mayo extremely lateral.
Yeah, and like Colm mentioned, the atmosphere, and that seeps into the players too. When you can feel the crowd getting antsy, sometimes there's that bit of fear that you don't want to go for the long distance point, because all you get is the groan, the disappointment. And the lateral football at the moment, we won't drag it out too much, but that's what it is. People are afraid to take the chance, and the pace goes out of the game. Once you take the pace out of the game, it's very easy to defend against, and you need fellas coming off the shoulder. Obviously, you have to do that smart. If there's so many bodies in front of you, you can't do it. But you're seeing it more and more often in most games where teams are probably prepared for what they're going to come up against, that they know they have to get their kickers into that quarterback position, coming out, kicking over the press. Obviously, when you get it, it's brilliant. They start pushing out that bit more, spaces open up. But if they start drifting wide, the crowd get more antsy, players get a bit more nervous, they don't want to be the one kicking it, and it just gives more energy to the opposition. So look, it is something I think a lot of teams will be working on, but as myself and Colm were saying off air, I think once you get to Croke Park and you get to some of the bigger teams, that'll go out the window a small bit. There'll be less fear. I think teams will be concentrating more on their own job and less of this blanket defence or deep defending. A lot harder to do that in Croke Park as well. So I think that'll bring it out. But obviously, if you can get a couple of shooters on the ball early days, kick it over the press, it kind of reduces that straight away, because the team has to push out and has to attack. Yeah.
I mean, I guess there are a few ways to beat a blanket defence, and we'll come to Derry in a moment. They have a whole range of options, it seems. But Colm, you know, yourself or Lee Keegan, you could beat a man, a bit of pace, that would help. It was interesting, you wouldn't have heard it really, Colm, if you were at the game, but Paul Flynn was on commentary in RTE, and I think, you know, inadvertently he was just giving us the Dublin method to break down a blanket, and in effect it was, look, he was almost saying this is pretty simple, you know, this shouldn't be that complicated. He was saying, in effect, you go down one touchline, you take a bunch of opposition defenders, you suck them in, invariably they'll come over, and then pretty quickly spread the play black out. You got runners coming through the middle, shooting through, and you either keep switching play or one of the runners will pick it off and come through with a bit of pace, and he's, like he said, you know, almost mathematically, you will get a shot off. Like it's just a matter of time, and it won't take overly long, whereas Mayo were just back and forth at a very slow pace. So I don't know, that's, I mean, Flynn and Dublin have done it for years, so that struck me as advice worth heeding. I couldn't see an obvious method in Mayo. I couldn't see, this is the pattern that they're definitely trying to break Louth down with.
No, from being at the game, Joe, I think what you're saying is right. They never really looked to probe them corners, come back around and move it to the other side. What they were doing an awful lot was their half-back line, their midfielders would actually end up being their furthest men forward. They were trying to drag the Louth blanket back towards their own goal and try and create a bit of space for a shooter around the D, but it wasn't really happening. I think the only really time it was successful was Stephen Cohen actually made a run for the D. He was being tracked, he comes back around and ends up showing for the ball himself and getting a mark at the end of the first half and kicking it over the bar. But that was the only really time that worked. Everything else was slow and predictable, and you mentioned about pace there from the half back line. I was surprised, and obviously you don't know what's going on with injuries, but I was surprised Paddy Durcan didn't start and Enda Hession didn't start for them two exact reasons that you're talking about, because they would inject that pace from the back, from the middle of third, and all you need is for a couple of line breaks like that, and suddenly things open up for you and it becomes a lot more difficult for the opposition. So I think going forward, I think that's certainly an area Mayo be looking at. They need to be injecting that pace, but certainly moving the ball quicker as well.
Yeah. I know, Darran, I agree with you. We don't want to drag it out too much, but the style of play that we're seeing at the moment, I watched this Mayo Louth game, it was just painful. It just is. And no one can tell me it's intriguing or fascinating or tactical. It's just really slow. And if you think even tiki-taka at its worst, at least a ball being passed along the ground 5-10 yards, there's a bit of zip to that, and there's a creation of angles, there's a bit of something going on. Whereas in GAA, it is just a player in possession trotting 10 metres and then his opposite or his teammate jogging the opposite way, and he might pop it to him and he trots another 15 metres. And I mean, I don't know, some people listen to their podcast at 1.5 speed. That's the only way to watch some of this. I saw Colm Collins, he was saying what we need to address is these long periods where possession is being held. If we can address that, we still have a fine product. I'm not the smartest man in this area, something like a shot clock maybe. That was Colm Collins, a manager. That was just one suggestion. I don't know what the answer is, but players are too skillful, they're too organised now, they've too much composure, they respect possession. This problem's here to stay, and I think the rule makers may have to jump in here.
Yeah, I think so, but I think when you're describing any game as intriguing or tactical, that's another way of saying it was boring.
That's what I mean. I'm not swallowing that anymore.
Yeah.
I'll listen to a political discussion that's intriguing.
Yeah. I think he's right. I'd probably be drawing the same line as he is. I don't have the answer, because I suppose teams are doing nothing wrong, and the way they see it is possession is key, and eventually a team will have to come up. But it is boring. It's I watched 3 games on Saturday and the Saturday game, and I was worn out from you. It's where I played in the games. I was exhausted from watching it. But it's boring, and players are very athletic. They'll do that all day. They're very comfortable on the ball. But they do need to change something. They're on with all these rule changes. It has to be something that a shot clock, or if you go over the halfway line, you can't go back, like in basketball or whatever it is. But if you don't bring pace to the game, as Colm was saying about the lads Durcan and Hessian coming on and pace, you're going nowhere. And it's the easiest thing in the world to defend against. And all it takes is one person to have a bit of bravery, try and break the line, come at pace, and somebody come off the shoulder. It sounds simple, as Paul Flynn was making it sound, but you have to take a chance. You have to be brave with it. I just think fellas are so obsessed with possession and stats and not having turnovers next to their name. There's a fear there. I don't want to be the one to lose the ball. I don't want to be the one having a wide from 40 yards and think I wasted possession. We're starting again, but all the tactics in the world, I just like a bit of off the cuff football, go on gut, go on feeling, and it sounds a bit simple and basic and old school or whatever, but you have to change something, because it is you could watch a fella go over 5 yards, hand pass over to the sideline, back over again, and it's so one pace
and under no pressure as well, under no pressure.
Because the defensive team are thinking, this is great, we'll save our energy here, I'll trot 5 yards over, my man will trot 5 yards over, and it's like doing a bit of a dance in front of each other, really.
I think whatever, and I agree, lads, I think something needs to be done, but I think whatever it is, it has to be very, very, we have to be careful with it, because we have to consider the club game as well, and how a referee is going to manage at club level with the shot clock. It'd be impossible, really.
You, I presume neither of you, Colm, you can go for. You would never advocate different rules at intercounty and club level. That's the ethos of the GAA, completely ruined if you did go down that route.
Yeah, I suppose you could, Joe. You could, but I don't think would it be sustainable. I don't know. Obviously, shot clock, you get away with it at inter-county level. You get away with holding a certain amount of players in the one half at inter-county level because everyone is mic'd up. There's absolutely no way that would work at club level. It'd be chaos at club championship game in that way. So maybe that could be a solution. Maybe you introduce different rules for inter-county and club. But look, that's far from ideal either. Let's be honest.
That'd be a very sad move to have to make.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would. It'd be terrible. I think Darren's point and your point, John, everything being so safe. It's almost like players, coaches are mic'd up to them and they're talking them through each play. Pass it to the man beside you and move. You know what I mean? It's almost like the coaching is just unbelievable and the lack of risk is unbelievable in a lot of games. Hopefully, John, when the jeopardy comes in, maybe things might change slightly and there will be a few more risks taken later on in the championship. Yeah,
and this, by the way, I should emphasise, and I presume I'm speaking for both of you as well, this is not to denigrate the players, and like their fitness levels are off the charts. They're playing in 25 degrees heat over the weekend. The commitment is there. They're training all year round. They are doing, like Louth, for instance. This is not about Louth. They are doing what they have to do to be competitive, and they were competitive. We're just talking about the overall product, which is not working. I don't know. I like if we're at a point where we're saying, these group stages aren't great now, but it'll be good when we get to Croke Park, and you're saying, the football's not great now, but like we'll get some more risk taken when we get to Croke Park. Like at a certain point, Darran, I want to start living life today. It was June, it was sunny, there was football on. Why can't it be a bit better today,
I know, like you actually cry out for days like that when you're playing. Like the game is normally electric, quick. It's like the pace goes up when the sun comes out. But it's not a criticism of players anyway, because the players have never been better, like fitness wise, just unbelievable. But I always go back to it, and I always get a bit of abuse on Twitter after about stats. I just think too much information. Genuinely, I think fellas have too much information. You've ran X amount of K, you had this amount of touches, you lost this amount of, Jesus. Like you open their local newspaper and it's going through every player individually. He had this amount of touches, this amount of kicks, this amount of hand passes, he had this amount of turnovers, this amount of wides. Like I know people say they don't read the stuff, they don't look at it, but it's at training as well. And I just think the more information you have, the more you think about stuff. And I would have always felt more comfortable on the field. Obviously, with tactics and stuff, but play it as you see it. And I think Colm was saying there, it is like players, they hear this stuff so often. It actually is like they're coaching through the game.
Yeah, and I know, I totally agree, because I wouldn't blame the defending team here. It's the attacking team. I even feel now, Darran, when say there's a turnover and there's like the sniff of a counter-attack, and maybe we can segue into Derry in a moment, because they will have a counter-attack, but I feel even too often, Darran, there's like a turnover and possession is won, and instead of like the team that have just won the ball saying, right, let's have a crack here, it's like the instinct is now, it's so embedded, I'm going to circle back and I'm going to fist it backwards, and we're going to get set again, and we're going to start over. And like that's heartbreaking. Like, I don't know, it can't be the right thing to do every time.
No, but like that, at least if there was a turnover in that sense, and let's say Louth, for example, took off, there's a bit of a buzz there's a bit of panic, there's a bit of emotion, there's a bit of excitement. Whereas if they turn it over, there's a mistake by Mayo or whatever it is, and it's just, all right, they have it out, slowly does it.
But what's funny, right, about that point, and this maybe is where we get back to the rules that have to be changed, because even at half time, the analysis allowed was once or twice they had a turnover, and then it was highlighted that a whole bunch of their players started sprinting forwards, and the point was made, now if you're turned over, nobody's at home and Mayo are in for a goal. And that happened to them against Dublin off a kick out or two, where a couple of Louth players bombed on, they lost the kick out, and suddenly Dublin were in. So like the coaching advice there increasingly is going to be, here, listen, don't bomb on, stay back. That's why I just feel like there's going to have to be some rule change of some sort. I just don't know what it is.
And that actually happened, Joe, twice against Mayo. Mayo turned them over around the middle of the pitch, and that was the only real goal chances Mayo had, because Louth were wide open. So that's an interesting one as well, that the couple of times where they actually did take off and take a couple of risks, they actually got 2 goal chances out of it, or conceded 2 goal chances.
Because what they're doing isn't wrong. It's like a failure of teams to break them down, I suppose, is the problem. But I also appreciate it's hard to break it down.
Yeah, and just it came into my head when you were talking there, lads, about turnovers, and I always think of Donegal 2012. Like when they, and this from playing against them, when they made a turnover back in your forward line, their defence, it was almost like a score in the crowd. The buzz, the energy, the cheer it got, and the pace that team broke at. Like that team gets labelled as being very defensive, and Jim McGuinness gets a bit of criticism still now about it. But the pace they broke at was sensational, and the buzz and the energy. You see very little of that now. It's very much turnover, okay, control. Let your players get up the pitch, a la Derry probably last year and this year. Let all your players get up the pitch. We'll hold the ball back here till they get up, and now we'll all go and attack.
Yeah. Final word to you on this, Darran, then we'll get talking about some of those other matches in a bit more depth.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a fair thing. Like my thing was always fortune favours the brave, but if you're too brave, the stats won't look too kindly maybe on you. But look, Louth will come away from the game saying we lost to Mayo. Mayo won the favourites to All Ireland. We lost by a point. That's progress. You have to play it to your strength. They probably think we're not far enough along the road to compete with this Mayo team. We don't care what anyone says about us, and I can totally understand that. Teams have to do what suits them, and probably this time next year they might have evolved as Donegal did back 10 plus years ago. They weren't very appealing the first year, and they kicked it on the second year. I suppose you have to get your house in order before you can concentrate on the forward side of things. But look, it's a common theme. But as Paul Flynn said, it is about moving. But I genuinely think you will break any structure down if you add pace. You need pace, you need runners. Even if I made a run off Colm and I didn't get it, I'm drawing eyes to me, which are going away from other players. So it is about just adding pace to the game. If you go back and forth in this one pace, slowly across the field, it doesn't matter if it's their first time on a football field, it'll be easy to defend against. But you add pace to something, all of a sudden there's a bit of worry. One player switches off for a second, but if you're keeping it too safe, it's just going to bore the life out of everyone.
I have images of you staring into space on your couch over the weekend, wondering what's it all about.
Well, it was actually worse. If I stared into space, it'd be grand. I was actually watching the cameras from the bar because I wasn't working on Saturday, so that was more entertaining.
We'll take a break and then we'll get into some of the games in a bit more detail. We're talking to Darran O'Sullivan and Colm Boyle. Gaelic Football on Off the Ball is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. You can check out #TheToughest for more. Back in just one moment.
Gaelic Football on Off the Ball
with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.
Gaelic Football on Off the Ball
with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.
Now you're welcome back. We're talking GAA with Colm Boyle and Darran O'Sullivan. I suppose, Darran, as a bit of a riposte to the fairly grim conversation we were having there just before the ad break, Derry put 3-14 on Donegal and Ballybuffet. So Donegal 1-15, Derry 3-14, the final score. That was 3-11 from play for Derry, often against packed defence. Unlike other sides where it feels like, you know, at times teams are running out of ideas against numbers, with Derry, Oren Lynch coming out of goal and patterns of play and 5 forwards inside the forward line and runners from deep, it feels like they have a real method and a good thing going. That was an impressive performance.
Yeah, it was. And like before I got into Derry, like I was actually delighted to see Donegal put up a bit of a performance with all the negativity around them. But what Derry bring is, like, when they bring out Oran Lynch out of goal, they're doing it for a reason. It's not just to soul up the field. And so he's coming as an overlap, as an extra body, make everything a 2v1. And then with the goals, all the goals come from pace and power.
Yeah.
And hard runs. It's impossible to stop. We're comparing GA to every sport with basketball coaches and soccer, but whenever I think of the hard, I always think of runners or inside centres in rugby and the lines that they pick. And I don't care how strong a defender is with any GA player now with the physical strength they all have. If you come at the right angle at pace, fellas can't move their feet quick enough. They stick out an arm. It's never going to be enough to stop a fella. And Derry are doing that, and they're creating goals from it.
Yes, Conor Doherty and McCluskey with numbers 4 and 5 in their backs for one of the goals, and then the Lachlan Murray, the fisted in goal again. There was that strong running through the middle column, and look, you'd know as a defender, if Darren's running on a good angle against you and has a soft shoulder, then you're in trouble and it's very hard to stop. Derry seem to manipulate defences and generate those kind of moments pretty frequently.
They do, in fairness, and I think a big plus for Derry at the weekend was they weren't reliant on Shane McGuigan to get the scores, come around on the loop. You know, you spoke about the boys coming from the back there, breaking lines for their goals. I thought Paul Cassidy was absolutely brilliant. You know, kicked 4 points from play. I think they had 8 or 9 different scorers overall. So I think that's a really good progression for Derry, and there was a range of scores in that. You mentioned there about how they broke the lines, their overlaps. I think Oran Lynch had 2 hand pass assists, which kind of sums up the modern game, to be honest. But it was really, really good play from Derry, and they eventually broke Donegal's resistance down. Darran touched on Donegal there. I was happy as well to see Donegal play well. I actually quite enjoyed this game, Joe, and maybe it was because the bar was set quite so low over the last couple of weeks. But the one thing I'd say about Donegal is they had a go at Derry. I think they could have taken the easy option of sitting back inside their 45, allowing Derry easy possession and let them come and attack them. But they really went after Oran Lynch's kick out, especially in the first half, and forced an awful lot of them long. And they won. I think they won 3 or 4 in a row. Jason McGee got up and plucked a few around the middle. And what that did, Joe, it just gave them a bit of energy. It gave the crowd a bit of energy. And they actually had loads of possession. Like I think they'd up on 60% possession or something like that, which against Derry is absolutely huge. The thing that was killing them was they couldn't get the scores on the board. I think they 10 wides or something like that in the first half. While Derry's efficiency was off the charts. I think they 10 or 9 or 10 from 11 or something like that. So that was really, really positive for Donegal. But overall, we talked about Derry in the second half. They showed how they're such a well-oiled machine. Donegal were never going to be able to stick with them, especially with the game plan they have. They stuck to it, and they looked really good in that second half for sure.
Oisin Gallen, worthy of honourable mention for Donegal, made his debut in 19, lots of injuries. Like, he kicked 9 points at the weekend, 5 from play against Chrissy McCaig as well, which is more than McCaig gave up in the entire championship last year. So that's a really impressive display from Oisin Gallen. On Derry, Darran, last year they pitch up in an All-Ireland semi-final, and I had thought, based on the way they played for a lot of the year, we were going to see Croke Park suiting their runners down to the ground and they'd be punching holes and a real threat. And yet against Galway they managed 1-6. It was like 4 points apiece at half time, and their goal came in the 75th minute. It was a real consolation kind of moment. So in effect they managed 6 points across the previous 74 minutes. And you remember, like, the finale played out with Oran Lynch up the pitch and Galway, you know, trying to score a goal into an empty net, and eventually Colm did. It was like an odd kind of spectacle in that sense. So I don't know, are Derry going to get back into a quarter-final, semi-final territory? Surely they're going to be scoring more than 6 points in 74 minutes, or do you think they'll go for more of the same?
No, I think their game is evolving, and we keep mentioning Donegal 2012. I think there was a bit of that where they're just they're on a journey, but they're taking it step by step, and they just seem to be kicking on every year. Even this year, with the way the lads came back after club duty straight away, they're just trying to grow them, keep the momentum tipping over. I think they're evolving all the time. Obviously, Kieran McFall back in is another big plus. They've changed up fellas. Owen McAvoy going into full back. He's freed up a few of the lads. I think they're very dangerous this year. I think they'll be more attacking like that. The fact that Shane McGuigan was held to 3 scores, 2 frees the weekend, yet they still kicked what they did, I think is going to give him a world of confidence. The last couple of weeks they were very over-reliant on him. But I genuinely think they're just a team that are evolving with every game. I think this system will suit the likes of them because they just get to fine-tune week on week.
Because a couple of weeks ago, Colm, we were wondering, well, if your life depended on it, which Ulster side is more likely to go all the way? And quite a few people that weekend said Tyrone when push comes to shove. Would you revisit that after that Derry performance? Was it that good?
I think I was one of them that said Tyrone as well, yeah. Joe. Maybe my opinion is changing slightly, but the fact that Derry still haven't done that in Croke Park, that might be a slight, until they go and prove that in a quarter-final or semi-final, then we might be able to make a better opinion of it. But there's no doubt about it, Joe. They looked really, really good the last day. They were flat 2 weeks ago against Monaghan, but that was fine after an Ulster final. It was always going to be a tough game for them, considering they bet them earlier on the championship as well. But the last day, they looked slick. They looked really, really slick. I think they'll finish top of the group and they're straight into being quarter final, and no one's going to want to play them for sure.
Kerry won 14, Cork 15 points. Have they pretty much surrendered the All-Ireland then in Kerry, Darran? Is that the talk?
I came on today going, how can I talk positively about that game? I was saying last week there was a bit of worry and felt we needed a big game, and I thought during the first half they were showing signs, but there's probably more worries after that game, if I'm being honest. I was chatting to a few people and we're all kind of saying, do we need something different? Do we need something new? But I don't think there's anything there for Jack to try.
You were saying last week that the subs bench isn't overflowing.
No, look, I think a lot of lads that have come into the panel this year, I think they were brought on obviously off the back of good county championships, but I don't think they were actually brought in thinking that they'd be ready to go this year. Had a couple of injuries, a few fellas left the panel, and even the fellas who were on the bench last year that got injuries, it's only now we're seeing the effect of that, because you lose a few starters and these fellas who you thought might be ready to come in aren't there. Subs bench is just looking that bit weaker and inexperienced. But I just think a lot of it as well, I think a lot of the Kerry lads are out of confidence. I think there's a bit of doubt in their mind, and I think a lot of them haven't been, I'm not going to say, criticised really, doubted, probably for the first time in their senior careers, especially the younger lads, and they're probably finding it hard to try and find that form. And it is all consuming into County GA, and it's probably all they're thinking about, and they're going, I'm working hard, I'm doing this, and it's just not working for me. Sean O'Shea had a very good first half the last day, but died out of the game in the second half. It's happening on a regular basis. Big thing for me is Kerry aren't kicking the ball, and if you're not kicking the ball, you might as well be any other team in the country.
Yeah.
The pace of the game is slow. Obviously, people talk about the over-reliance on David Clifford. No, if you want to be over-reliant on someone, you might as well be over-reliant on him, because some of the stuff he's doing, it's frightening. But it's nuts. Just his whole attitude. Anytime they need the ball, they need to get something, he's out and he's just demanding. It's a case of just give me the ball, leave me do it.
Yeah.
But it is, I hate going back to David Moran all the time, and it's not even about catching ball, but his first instinct was always kick. Let me kick the ball up, and because they're not doing that, the half forwards are way further back the pitch. There's no link, and it's just slowing the whole. They're having to run it up, not at a great pace either, I must say. It's just slowing it down, and all teams are doing is they're funneling bodies back, probably 2 or 3 around David, and unfortunately, like I said, some of the boys are just out of form as well. And obviously, when you're looking for maybe an impact off the bench, we're just not getting it.
It's so funny you say that about the kicking, because I'm paraphrasing Paul Galvin here, and I'll probably misparaphrase him, right? But I remember him doing an interview a couple of years ago, and the gist of what he was saying, give or take, is that when he looks out for Kerry and how they're playing, he loves to see a fella get a ball kind of half-back territory, maybe not even a hop or a solo, but like that lovely foot pass that is so Kerry, it's silky smooth, one bounce into a fella's chest and the ball just being moved, the antithesis to what we're talking about in the first part of the conversation about trotting and hand passing, but like that Kerry moving the ball with a bit of vigour and a bit of confidence. That against Cork, it was, as you said, very mundane by comparison.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this bouncing into a fella. I don't think I ever saw Darran kick a ball into a fella's chest, but everything was just bouncing outside him, which is, as a forward, his dream. It's close, impossible to mark. But obviously, if you have a fella in the half back line or midfield and you know all he wants to do is kick, if you're a forward, your first instinct is, oh, Joe has it, I'm going here, he's going to look for me. Whereas when you start thinking, oh, they're going to run it, you're not going to be burning energy running back and forth if you don't think the ball's coming, and it just slows the whole thing down. And
then even if a fella's half considering a kick and there's no movement, it's it's like a vicious circle.
Yeah, but that's what it is. If you don't anticipate the kick, you don't run. And then if that person does look up then and you're not running, obviously they're not going to kick it. And
you're muttering about him and he's muttering about you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're moaning about each another. But a lot of the kicks as well aren't difficult kicks. Like, you're not looking at a 60-yard pinpoint into a fella's chest. Like, we have a big pitch there. And more often than not, if you get the ball first, it's a 40 yards bounce pass outside a fella. You can kick it 20 yards outside him. You don't even have to be accurate a lot of the time. But a lot of it is having your first instinct not to be backwards or sideways, or I need to take a play, which a lot of players like to do. I have the ball now, I might as well show what I can do with it, so they'd hop it and so on. But if your first instinct is to kick it, and the players further up the field know that, I know it sounds stupid, like, oh, it's a simple game, but a lot of the times it just cuts out so much
crap,
unnecessary. Yeah, and all the players are well able to do it at every county, but a lot of it is that bravery and that fear of turnovers. I don't want to lose the ball here. We worked hard enough to get it back.
Yes.
But it just cuts out all the rubbish.
Because Colm might say, imagine you're marking Darran there and there's 30 yards between you, him and the touchline, and he starts running for the ball into space. You love nothing more than man in possession further up the field, not to kick it to him.
Oh, absolutely. When you're playing against certain teams, let's say Kerry, Dublin, as a half-back, you knew you had to be glued to your man. Their boys were always getting the head up, looking for that pop ball to the half-forward line and starting to attack from there. But there was so many teams you played against, Joe, as a half-back. You knew you could drop off your man 10, 15 yards. That ball wasn't coming to your man, and you could sit in and protect your full back line. You know what I mean? And you know certain players in particular that Darran mentioned that won't kick the ball. So there's huge parts of it. On Kerry, just an interesting thing I was looking to see, and Darran has mentioned about the kick, and I think he's 100%. Just how they were setting up defensively, and the big tactical thing they did, Joe, at half time was so on Kerry, like they conceded every kick out against Mayo that they changed that wasn't working in the first half, and I was interested to see would they continue that into the Cork game, and they absolutely did. They pretty much conceded every kick out to the Cork full back line. I think the Cork full back line, and started the pressure from there and slowed the ball down the pitch as much as possible to get a defensive setup, and that's a huge tactical shift for Kerry, Joe, not just from last year but over the last number of years. And I've mentioned this.
Yeah, you have. No, you spotted that. So is it too simple to say, well, without David Moran, Kerry don't feel as assured at winning, that long kick out, and so they're not risking high press, too many up the field, and you're in at them? Is that the thinking, do you suspect? Because you don't know why, otherwise why would they go away from that high press which was so successful?
I think there's a huge part of it, Joe. I don't think there's a confidence there and that they're winning enough for the long range kickouts, and I think something that was a huge strength for them, they're now using it, so they're now going away from that to cover up a weakness, which is the weaknesses at the back and the defenders, and maybe enough of their defenders aren't playing well enough in one-on-one situations at the minute.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that going on. I think further down the line, I'd be interested to see, is this just a short-term thing they're looking at to get them to a quarter-final and we'll change things up then?
Yeah.
I think long-term that won't suit Kerry. I don't think it'll suit them if they're playing a big team in Croke Park and they're conceding huge amounts of possession to them and they're forward to chase them down the pitch. So I'd be interested to see, is this just a short-term fix or is this something they're looking at long-term?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Is it easier, Darran, to find your form in a run of games, or do you like that block of 3-4 weeks, retreat down to the training pitch and we'll cook something up? Now, Kerry don't have a choice here. They've got games. Yeah,
it's funny. Sometimes the games you can play yourself into form, but if your confidence isn't there, every game you're doubting yourself more and more, and sometimes you need to go back into that bubble. And it might only take one training session, might be one moment in a training session, all of a sudden you get going. It might be a quiet word by one of the lads at training, it might be a quiet word by a selector that turns you around. It could even be a video session where Jack might go and he starts showing clips of last year, and a fella be seeing what he was doing last year, and it just kind of reignites the fire and gives a bit of confidence before training. But definitely, I mentioned confidence earlier, and even with Colm talking about the kickouts, I think there's a lack of confidence, obviously, without David in the middle, but I just don't think the boys have been winning the breaks either. So I don't want to put everything on the midfielders, because they're never going to catch every ball. But we weren't winning breaks either against Mayo, and I think that by conceding the kickouts, it shows a lack of confidence in the middle eight to win the dirty ball and to be hungry enough to win it. But when you're not pressing and you're not risking that turnover, it takes the supporters out of it as well. Because when you're pressing a kick out and there's a chance of a turnover, obviously one side is very nervous and you can feel the tension, and the other supporters that are pushing, they can smell blood, and it gets the crowd into it when you're pushing up. But if you're sitting back and you're leaving a fella kick it out, and like we talked about earlier, that slow pedestrian build up, because you're only dropping off trying to condense the pitch, it's sucking the life out of the game. Whereas I just think, like, football sport is about being brave, but too much of the game at the moment about containment. Right, we'll condense the pitch here and we'll give them no space to go into. They'll go back and forth, they'll make a mistake, and kind of living in hope.
Yeah, it's all pretty interesting, I guess. As a final thought, Colm, listening to you guys, there's just no outstanding team out there at the moment. So, you know, we talk about an open championship. I saw Malachy Clerkin over the weekend said, when you say it's an open championship, that's a euphemism for there's no outstanding team, and we're kind of picking holes in everybody at the moment is where we are.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we are, Joe. Myself and Darran were speaking beforehand. People's perception are changing on teams week in, week out, because we're seeing teams so often here, and that'll probably continue on over the next couple of weeks. But it's so open, Joe. It's literally, it's impossible to call a winner at the minute. You know, you can look at every team at the minute and pick faults in their games. You know what I mean? In their teams, in their panels. From quarter final onwards, I think that's only when we're really going to know where the big teams are at.
Yeah. So we're still shadowboxing. Is that what I'm hearing?
We nearly did the full show without it.
Just a couple of more weeks of shadowboxing. We're almost there, fellas. Thank you both so much. Cheers. Colm Boyle, thank you. Darran O'Sullivan, cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, lads.
There you go. Colm Boyle, formerly of Mayo, well, still of Mayo, of course, and Darran O'Sullivan of Kerry. And Gaelic Football on Off the Ball is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. You can check out #TheToughest for more.
Gaelic Football on Off the Ball
with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.